issue with Thai. She called Karen Thai, I can't remember, and then the U.S. trade representative. And maybe for those who don't know, Kenya is currently in the middle of negotiations for a permanent trade agreement with the U.S. And we've talked about that trade agreement here before on the show, the U.S.-Kenya trade agreement.
Okay, we have one president.
Yeah.
I want us to talk about, like, I really want to know why you support his policies.
Like the finance bill, for example, what are some things
the
that
the finance bill has, and there is I don't want to get into it because it has areas that, for one, if you ask me, with regard to the housing levy, I would have loved to see them push for what initially they had proposed, where it would have been a savings scheme for Kenyan employees, which required employers to match the contribution. That was flipped, and now it became a tax, which means you, the contributor, do not benefit. Oh, yeah.
No, it's okay. No.
Just
keep talking.
Just being passionate.
Ali warned me about that. He warned me about that, and that's why he's taking me to this level. He warned me about it. He told me, I know you'll be married at the table at some point. Anyway, but it has taken away where the contributor is not, it's less, but it's a tax, which means that's not something you ever recover. So I personally feel that that's something the Kenyan citizen lost an opportunity to, where they would have a scheme that would have been good for people in terms of.
But was there anything that you liked? Like, for example,
you know what? Because a lot of people were against that levy thing.
Yep.
I'd want to know why you support that levy thing. Because for me, I feel like I'm very removed from that.
If you look at what the president has a big emphasis on the affordable housing, which before, if you go to the Big Four agenda even of the previous regime, the former president, housing was one of the biggest things, and that's why he maintained the PS for housing, right? Inga was under Uhuru's administration. I feel that the affordable housing scheme is something that's very good for Kenya. We need to eliminate the various slums we have in the country. I also think that it is time, as Kenya, we started to look at decongesting, like Nairobi. I don't know where all the government services have to be centralized. Some of those can be taken to other regions and create employment in other regions, decongest the city. So I think the housing scheme is something that's very good. I looked at the Kenya Mortgages and Refinance Company that they intend to fund most of the affordable housing scheme through. And I thought it was a very noble idea, where they have regulated interest rates for the low-income people to give them, a good dwelling. I think that's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Let me bring more to that. The biggest thing people have said, and this is me talking to friends who actually live in Kenya and work in Kenya, like, somebody has already built their own house. Right. So they really don't need this. At the time, it was called levy. So I'm like, I will never need it, later in life, because I already have my thing. Why should I contribute to it? So I think what I would want to hear from you is, I know you say you supported it. What would you say to that person now from that side of you? Because I think I had a lot of opposition to that.
That's why I said it was structured as a savings scheme. Remember, I said if you go and look at it, it was you pull 3% and your employer has to match, right? Which is where I feel the Kenyan citizen lost, because employers would have had to match what you're contributing. And if yours didn't go into the housing scheme, then that fund would come to you, would be accessible to you, almost similar to the 401k here. That would have made money that you get back. That's the way it was structured.
No.
Yes, it was the way it was structured, Ali.
No, but let's continue.
Yeah. That's the way it was structured as a savings scheme, but they were going to use...
only for housing?
What they were going to do is that scheme was going to be used as the kitty to fund those who go into the housing scheme. Remember, they're being given mortgages at a low interest rate, at a lower interest rate than the current market value, right? Okay. So that kitty was going to be used to fund those who get into the housing scheme. But you who contributes to it, if you don't use it, your fund was going to grow as a retirement a fund.
So you could
And I think, and I keep saying, that's why I feel that the Kenyan citizen lost, because now it's been turned into a tax.
But now, okay, besides, like the housing levy, was there, like anything, like
Something else,
in that financial bill? Because there were so many things in there. But is there anything in particular? Is there like one or two things that you could pick out and say, wow, this is going to take Kenya to the next level? It's going to put Kenya, anything?
The one thing I'll say is, in my view, you need to give this administration the time to implement their policies.
Yes,
I'll give you an example.
No, I agree.
I give you an example.
No, we're in
I'll give you an
agreement. We're in
example.
agreement. We're in
the fund-
agreement to that, and you're
Yeah.
going to give but is there anything in that which is now law, which is now Finance Act? I mean, of course, the courts
It's
have
challenges.
suspended it, but is there any one or two things that you just look at it and said, wow, this was so
avoiding
genius?
dissecting that thing, and I'll keep giving the examples that I think are relevant to us building the country and making people understand.
I think
it.
you should, because we want to hear that
Okay,
point of
let
view.
me-
Also, I think for me again, I say I keep learning.
I'll tell you something. The one thing that this administration has done, and it's going to be a core part of their budget, is to make sure that the farmers are supplemented, right? And what that's going to do, we're actually going into a harvest right now, right? In the next maybe month and a half or so, we're going into a harvest.
The main harvest.
Yeah.
It's already happening.
So what that's going to do is inject money directly into the economy, to the common person. Because what we had previously is farmers could not afford to buy the seedling, farmers could not afford to buy the fertilizer. So nobody was growing food. And we saw what happened with, this, actually one of the biggest things, the reasons they're banging sufurias around is because of the cost of what? Of unga, right? But with this supplemental program that the government has for farmers, in probably another 2-3 harvests, we're going to have more than enough corn in the country. Go ahead.
So do you think that we only need to give this government time for us to see the policies take place? What do we do in the meantime when people are crying we cannot afford life, like food?
And also, how
like
much
that.
how much time is time?
need.
Can
Can I
I've
ask-
got those
I
are
need-
two questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
before you answer, I need to comment on something here. Some questions here, which are legit. Pablo says, I think this debate will not be that much fruitful. I have so far heard the phrase, I have not been following Kenyan news much lately. Then how would one state facts on happenings if they haven't followed news? Isn't that trying to sit on the fence? I think part of that is just kind of putting a disclaimer. I might not have had everything I need to hear for this conversation, but I'm gonna try to have it. So I think just this grace there that we need to have, and so I think that's what I really want to talk
Stephen
about.
JJ says, for democracy to prevail, every seat can be contested and put to book. Why can't one audit the results? We are a democracy, ama. Why is it that hiyo ya preso is always naleta shida? We have audits to make sure stuff works. Why are some people against the audits? And then he says, our systems, we all know, are wanting to say the list. And then Afro-Jamaican says, but it's not about the individual, it's about pooling the resources. It works in Jamaica and Trinidad, but there should be a sliding tax scale. And then you can read that other comment from Pablo. I think Pablo still comments from me as a supporter
Of the government,
Yeah.
I think I have seen a lot of excesses, especially from the security forces. There are some people who are protesting peaceably, as per Article 37 of the Constitution. Secondly, the threatening statements coming from some leaders within the government are totally uncalled for. Case in point, the CS for Trade Parliamentary Majority Leader, Senate Majority Leader, etc. Then he continues to say, I would want to hear from Alan what he thinks of statements or tweets coming from the likes of CS Moses Kuria, which caused him to miss out on the high-level meeting with the trade officials from the U.S.
And I want to quickly comment about like that issue with with Thai. She called Karen Thai, I can't remember, and then the U.S. trade representative. And maybe for those who don't know, Kenya is currently in the middle of negotiations for a permanent trade agreement with the U.S. And we've talked about that trade agreement here before on the show, the U.S.-Kenya trade agreement. And I've been following closely these negotiations, because the U.S. side put their priorities in a document, and the Kenyan side also put their priorities in a document. And I've read both sides. So currently they're in the middle of a negotiation. And I'll tell you one thing: the U.S. has very strong negotiators. They bring, like some of their best out to these negotiations. And what the current U.S. trade representative is doing, I mean, I can't go in her mind and tell, like why she refused to meet with the CS for trade. I mean, of course, she never verbally gave the reasons, but grapevine has it's because of some of the threats that he's been putting out. This right here, I strongly believe, just knowing a thing or two about negotiations, this is a negotiation tactic. And you see, the problem is that for Moses Kuria to be brought back to the table, the U.S. is going to demand stuff. When you look at the U.S. side, as we speak right now, there are certain things that they've put there that don't even make sense. Like things that they've put there for their own geopolitical influence. Like, for example, they have a clause that talks about, like Kenya supporting the U.S. in every vote they make in the UN on issues regarding Israel. And you wonder, what does this have to do with trade between Kenya and the U.S.? So there's so many things that the U.S. has secretly put in there, not necessarily secretly, because these documents are open. Anyone can go online and read them. But what's happening right now is they're looking, because this is not like a Goa. This is a permanent, it's equivalent of what used to be NAFTA. Like it was changed to something else, but it's a permanent trade document. So of course the U.S. is looking at the interests of the U.S., and Kenya of course should be looking at the interests of Kenya. So now when you have all these weapons on your side, and you've already sidelined the trade CS, before you bring them to the table, you will say that we want this, and this, before you can bring this guy back to the table. So these are some of the consequences that we get from, like reckless statements. And Kenya is a model that the US is trying to use to what they're gonna, like do across sub-Saharan Africa, because I think they want to go to other countries, and Kenya is being used as a model. And right now, I can tell you, or for anyone who's been following this closely, in those negotiations currently, we are not winning.
All right, let's give him a chance to respond to any of these things.